Joining us now is the only former female police officer who's now a Member of Parliament. That's the Chief Whip of the Liberal Democrats, Wendy Chamberlain. Wendy Chamberlain, thank you very much for making the time to speak to us today. First of all, let's just get your sort of reaction to what we heard from Lady Angelini earlier today.
To be honest, I'm not surprised because so much of the detail of Couzens' offending came out during the trial and subsequent inquiry. What has surprised me is how endemic the cultural and systemic issues are within policing. As you rightly said, I was a police officer up until 2011. I'm not going to pretend that my service, I didn't experience and see misogyny, but I really thought we had moved on in the last decade. But the failure of a number of forces in relation to Couzens is really shocking.
And that is kind of what's so astounding to this. I mean, there are many things that are astounding to this situation, Wendy Chamberlain, but the fact that three forces allowed this individual to carry on despite knowing many of the things that he had done. What does that tell us? I mean, it says to me that the police are so desperate to have recruits that they'll take anyone in.
Well, I think it tells me that there's a lack of investigation and there's a lack of coordination between forces. Lady Eilish today said that Couzens should never have been a police officer. But I think even worryingly, at this moment in time, we could have somebody offending in one force, not being identified as a police officer, that information potentially not being passed to the force in which they serve. And we could be seeing other situations. I mean, David Carrick obviously wasn't that long ago either. The cultural aspects are important too, because, you know, it seems that Couzens, although people weren't aware of the depth of his offending in terms of close colleagues, there's certainly many who were aware of some of his very abhorrent views and types of activities that he was undertaking.
Yeah, and look, he was flagged at some points, wasn't he? Because he wasn't able to become an officer for Kent Police, but that was because of his financials, which is the wrong way round, isn't it? The fact that he didn't have any money in his bank account shouldn't have ruled him out, but the fact that he was, you know, indecently exposing himself to people should have been the thing that stopped him.
Absolutely, and the lack of investigation into those indecent exposures, which we know are often a gateway to more serious offending. And the reality is that the police service is very stretched, and as a result, some of those cases are not investigated in the way that they should be. But the fact that there was evidence there that identified Couzens and meant that not only could he have been apprehended, but he could have been ejected from the police force at that time, weren't taken forward is appalling.
And you say stretched, when Chamberlain. I think you might be being fair, because you also talk about the culture there as well, and there has to have been some allowance of this kind of behaviour, knowing that he behaved like this outside of work. There are incidents when he was reported to have behaved inappropriately with colleagues before, you know, going on to get other jobs. It may well be that they didn't have the people to resource and interview him, but also that some of it was allowed.
Absolutely. I mean, the Casey report is a year old now. Back in October, an FOI by my party, the Liberal Democrats, showed that there was almost 130 officers who'd been had allegations of domestic abuse against them who were still serving. So that just does suggest that there is a cultural issue there that absolutely needs to be tackled. And one of the things that really shocked me about the Casey report was the lack of training and support for first-line managers. If you really want to deal and tackle culture, you need to have a strong first-line manager that can call out and deal with behaviour and show the people working for them what is and isn't acceptable.
And of course, this is the first part of the review, isn't it? Angelini's going to also look at the Carrick situation as well. Are you calling on the government to accept all the recommendations for this first phase?
Yes, absolutely. As we called for the government to accept all the recommendations of the Casey report last year, which they didn't, because they didn't accept that the Metropolitan Police was institutionally racist and misogynistic. So I hope, you know, the Home Secretary said a number of things in the Chamber today. I hope the funding is there so that the IT changes that are needed will take place. But the fact remains that there is still the potential for people to be offending and serving within the police force today.
Has he set himself a time frame as to when he's going to accept these recommendations, when they're going to review them, when they're going to bring them in? I mean, there are some recommendations that you think will be a no-brainer. If a person has been found to be indecently exposing themselves in public, they perhaps should not then go on to get into the police force and then get promoted within the force too.
Absolutely, and the fact that those who are facing allegations of domestic abuse or sexual offences are not routinely suspended, I think the general public would be astonished by that. So I think there's some actions that the Home Secretary can take very, very quickly, and it's quite clear that the Everard family and all those affected want to see the government do that.
Okay.